This was back in October of 2017. I saw some strange creatures. I was at my uncle's house in the backyard with my parents and a few cousins. My cousin had this spinning wheel thingy that you could either ride or push around. I got on it, and while going around, I heard some dogs barking in the distance. Not unusual, as there were Doberman pinschers in the dog pen nearby. But after a while of riding around, I started hearing something else too, like an animal rustling through leaves or grass. The thing was getting closer to me, but all else remained quiet besides the animals outside. Suddenly, they stopped making noise, which made me freeze in my spot on the wheel for a second, before checking to see if anybody else noticed anything unusual. That was when I noticed I had ridden out of the yard and was a lot closer to the woods at the edge of the property than I had thought. I could still very visibly see the rest of the family, who all appeared to have not even seen that I wasn't right there. My dad and uncle were taking care of the grill. My aunt and mother busy setting up the table, and my cousins were just messing about with a Nerf gun. Even though I could have just yelled and they would have been able to hear me, their voices seemed really far away. I mean, even the dogs from down the street seemed far more quiet. I felt this weird urge to scream and run, but also like I was rooted to the spot, frozen and could not move. Just stare into the tall grass that just moments before had been rustling, and now silent and still. I knew instinctively there was something there. The best way I can describe it, it would be like when you're underwater. That kind of muffled sound where you know stuff is going on around you, but you can't quite make it out. It sounded almost like there were low voices coming from the tall grass. We'd been warned not to play in that grass in this particular spot that leads into the woods behind my uncle's house, mainly because of snakes. But this did not sound like slithering or hissing. Then, the voice-like noise stopped, and there was more rustling again, like something sure as hell was moving in there. Thankfully, sounding like it was heading back into the trees, and not towards I. But I still just waited, feeling unable to move. To this day, I am unable to tell you exactly what emerged from that grass and crawled into the woods. There were two of them, both very similar in size. The best example of what they should have been, I guess, would be a deer. They looked like some sort of deer, but wrong. Deer gone wrong, horribly disfigured or mutated. That's literally the best way to describe what they were. And no, they moved like they weren't used to being on four legs. They acted uncomfortable, awkward, stilted and stunted. I thought maybe those were the injured or deformed. But in all honesty, they just looked wrong. As soon as they disappeared back into the woods, I felt like a release, and all of a sudden, all the sounds from around me came back clear, and I heard and saw my mother call and waving at me, and telling me the hot dogs were now ready, and to come wash up. I never told them at all what I saw, because frankly, I don't know. And also, they probably wouldn't believe me if I did. Just in case they had, I want to keep thinking I imagine it. It's really the only way I can sleep at night. But I have a feeling deep down what I saw is more real than everything around me. This was long before I knew what a skinwalker was. But one time when I was 17, I was walking home from high school when I just got this discernible feeling I was being watched by something, not someone. I looked around, following my instincts. I saw nothing but a bush moving out in the distance. as if something was hiding behind it. It had to be a skinwalker. And that same year, my grandmother had had a ton of encounters with these beings, and they were constantly following her around, which meant that I too was now a target for these same beings. I had gotten so used to seeing them, I wasn't just afraid, I was always afraid. Of course, the thing with skinwalkers is that unless you know about them, know what to look for, you never even knew they existed, which is the entire point. They can possess, if that is the right word, anyone or anything. I live in constant fear. I wish there was some sort of test, like you see in the movies with demons. You know, throwing holy water at them, and if they sizzle, you kinda know. But there is nothing like that for a skinwalker. And even if there was, I can't just walk about pouring holy water over people, just in case. I think you kinda understand. But I guess once you know what you're looking for, you can tell. It's often the giveaway is the eyes. The way they move, and it seems wrong. Especially if they are walking in animal form. Ever seen a dog that looked overly intelligent? A deer or coyote that didn't walk quite right, as if it wasn't used to being on four legs? How about a person in the street? Someone you've never seen before, and yet something seemed both off and yet familiar. Despite never having laid eyes on them before, they seem to turn up several times throughout your day, and yet you may have traveled miles. I've had all of those things. One of the worst and most terrifying experiences was when I was followed for almost an entire day by what I am sure was one person using many different people to walk in. How could I tell? How did I know that somebody else was using all these different people to follow me around? Their eyes and smile, every single one of those very different people. From young, old, male, female, they all had that same dead look in their eyes. That same awful smile. So yeah, I'm always afraid. I am always glancing over my shoulder, looking in the dark corners and shadows. You would be constantly on edge too if you have ever seen a regular-looking dog smirk at you, smile in only a way that a human could possibly do, as if a human was trying to control every feature. And you want to know the worst thing? What is even worse than literally knowing if people around you are actually them or something else? That is the worst. Why are they following me? If the original target, for want of a better word, was my grandmother, who is the only person who truly believes, why did they jump from her to me? Or is more my family under attack? What do they want? I just can't find the right answers, and I don't know who to talk to. Or at least who would be willing to talk to me about this. I just want to know why they won't leave me alone. I don't want to spend my entire life being afraid, always looking behind me, never trusting anybody. It's ruined friendships, relationships. Is that what they want? I'm hoping maybe, just maybe, you or somebody can send me in the right direction, or at least tell me that I'm not alone and I can leave them somehow. I just want a normal life again. Is that too much to ask? Can you help me? When my grandfather died when I was just at the tender age of 11, he left behind an old journal that had some crazy stories written inside of it about his time on the Navajo reservation back when he was much younger. He had many written stories about these creatures called skinwalkers. Of course, I didn't believe any of them. But after what happened the other day, I'm beginning to think that these creatures are real. Not all the stories in the journal were necessarily new to me. I had heard some of the encounters before, but usually, if grandfather began to tell one, my mom would cut him off and give him the look. Sure, she wanted us to know about it and embrace our heritage, but also, she didn't want us constantly looking over our shoulders, wondering if that dog, horse, or whatever it was was really just an animal. One of the stories he had managed to sneak was that one of an old lady who seemed to be able to travel remarkably quick, especially for somebody with such advanced years, who was often spotted deep in the woods whilst others were hunting, only then to be found on the reserve an impossibly short time later. To our young minds, that didn't seem particularly scary, more wondrous. She was just a little old lady, maybe with magical powers of speed. Super granny, right? But the things grandfather wrote down were far more detailed and far more frightening, depicting these people as black witches with evil intent, not just old ladies who magically appeared in places too quickly just to mess with others. These stories involved murder and malice, and if true, would be the stuff of nightmares. Even at 11, when I was just beginning to read more horror and stay up later to catch nighttime movies, I still didn't believe. Sure, to a young kid, say 5 or 6, an old lady could be magical, but to an 11-year-old, witches and these powers grandfather wrote about couldn't be real. I thought that for the next 10 years, until the other day. Funnily enough, it happened back at the family home. I'd moved away a couple of years before, but still visited fairly regularly, and was home for a birthday, actually. Since all of us had moved out, my parents had gotten a dog, and wanting some fresh air, and despite it being fairly late in the evening, I'd volunteered to take her for a walk. We headed out into the woods behind the house, where we'd play for hours as kids, and I'd let her run around for a while, all whilst I just enjoyed the clean air. After only a few minutes, I heard her whimpering. My first thought was that she'd maybe stood on a thorn or something. It was dark, but there was still just enough light to see that she was on the floor, shaking and whining, which was odd, since she'll usually pick a fight with anybody, and is fiercely protective. I'd never seen her in this submissive stance before. Then, I saw why. A pair of eyes were glowing through the tree line. It was unnerving to say the least, as the eyes appeared to look human, but were low down like animal level, and I could just about make out the shape of a large dog, more like a wolf. This creature didn't make a noise, didn't bark, growl, nothing. It was stood and watched, and then it seemed to stand up. I don't mean like a dog when it begs. I mean it stood up like a man. My dog yelped, ran over to me, behind my legs, still shaking. I've seen her square up to the other dogs way bigger than her, but she was terrified. I bent down to comfort her, and when I looked again, it was gone. She barked once, running all the way back to the house, not bothering to wait for me, and I could tell you, I was right behind her.